Hi all, let's have a look at another game from the London Classic to see actually how Magnus Carlsen managed to win the event and his striking series of wins after his first round loss. Now, in the second round he was faced with GM Michael Adams, Britain's top rated on the FIDE rating list Grandmaster 2723. Magnus played c4, so he quietly avoids mainline opening theory. He doesn't want to particularly, I guess, play into Michael's Marshall Gambit if he played e4, which he's been using as a sort of drawing tool, not necessarily to get massive Gambit compensation and win games spectacularly, but just to secure draws as black. So c4 sidesteps a lot of sharp opening theory. Knight f6 was played by Michael Adams, and now knight c3, and now we see e5. So kind of reverse Sicilian position. Now white plays knight f3, so we have a kind of the Sicilian reverse Sicilian 4 knights variation, but sort of dragon type move g3 if this had been played with black. So g3, bishop c5 was now played. Okay, and now, although tempting is knight e5, I think black ends up slightly better here, because c4 is going to be dropping off. After, knight takes, d4 is not so hot here for white. So white just played bishop g2. Magnus played bishop g2, and now we see d6 and both sides castle. Okay, now d3, seemingly timid move, but white's keeping control over the light squares. These timid looking moves in the hands of very, very strong players are not so timid. I believe they're very, very coherent. They're part of a very coherent light square strategy here to play d3 and stretch on the queen side. So actually a6 gives the bishop a bit of breathing room to go back, and now we see a3 as though black had been anticipating the bishop being kicked back soon anyway. So bishop a7 immediately, not even waiting now for b4. b4, black's playing all the moves in anticipation so far. And now bishop e6, as though maybe either d5 or queen d7 and bishop h3 to try and remove the light square bishop. Both seem kind of logical plans. I guess black could also be tempted in this position by the move bishop f5 to echo one of my own games from the FIDE Open, as if black might want to play e4. But in this position, yeah, maybe it's worth white playing knight d2, seemingly passive move, but just to make sure black hasn't got e4 as a break to try and damage this nice pawn structure. But in the game anyway, so Michael Adams played bishop e6. And then we see knight d2 anyway, so white's increasing that grip on e4 here with this move knight d2. Rook b8, and now rook b1, as though b5 might be on the cards. And again, Michael kind of anticipates a move in advance, as though b5 might be on the cards. He plays knight e7. b7 is also protected by that other anticipatory move, rook b8. So a lot heavy sort of prophylaxis, move before prophylaxis from black so far in this game. But now a4. Okay, so white's intent just in gaining a bit of space, maybe dangerous pawns in the endgame. You've been getting a dangerous advanced pawn in the endgame at some point. Queen d7, and now b5. So, I mean, this is like an echo of my own game from the FIDE Open, but played very well from white. No major issues. White doesn't mind, Magnus doesn't mind his weakened king on the light squares. He knows what he's getting in return. Yeah, this isn't such a bad deal in this position, I think, to lose the light square bishop after bishop h3. So what is he getting in return here? Well, his grip on the light squares is still there. In contrast to my own game, there isn't a fearsome fianchetto bishop on this diagonal. Bishop's stuck on a7 at the moment. But is it kind of dangerous on a7, actually, pinning this pawn? Well, f2 is not really a target. If white doesn't, leaves the rook there, the position's kind of solid. There's no major weak points to pick on here. And in fact, the bishop might have a slight downside here, that this bishop can go now on this diagonal, cause some harassment and potential damage. So bishop a3. Okay, Michael Adams is in no rush actually to take on g2 here. He actually plays just h6, quite seemingly a little waiting move. and now we see e3, so blunting actually that bishop on this diagonal a little bit, and maybe in the future, you know, white might even try d4 at some point in the future. Bishop takes g2 finally, king takes g2, and now we see a highly committal move actually from Michael Adams here, a bit surprising, maybe a bit counterintuitive. But maybe, you know, if it is considered that this is a positional threat to maybe lock the bishop in further with knight b3 and d4, maybe Michael Adams is seizing again a bit of prophylaxis to try and do something about this potential problem bishop straight away now. He plays actually bishop c5, not minding in fact double pawns if white takes. You know, he's getting a bit of play in the centre, a bit of central pressure. But Magnus is not too worried. He takes on c5. Not too worried about the central pressure. He plays knight f3, protecting his d3. e4 is not on the cards at the moment, so e5, something has to be done about e5. It's protected now with queen e6. So getting the queen nicely out of the way, it seems for rooks maybe to, you know, exert a bit of pressure on d3. Okay, but also e4 might actually be on the cards to fragment the white structure now. So this breaking move is locked now at the cost of a slight concession. e4 slightly concedes d4 as a weakness, but is it that exploitable? It's all a bit of swings and roundabouts now, locking the opponent's moves, the price of that locking. The price here, d4, it doesn't seem too exploitable in this position. Okay, c6 is played. Right, and now just queen b3, so white can now protect maybe d3 with a rook, but you know, maybe it does seem a little bit as though white's got okay, it's all very positional stuff. He's lost his fianchetto bishop, but is it a bit passive? Is this really enough to win a game like this? Well, we'll see over the next few moves how the position evolves. Rook b d8. Okay, white first takes on a6 and now defends the d3 pawn rather humbly. Knight g6, and this carries with it a very concrete threat now, knight f4 check, as if takes then queen g4. So against this, again, another seemingly very, very humble move. But it doesn't really matter, the position is kind of very quiet and strategical, and white's aiming to get subtle sort of little trump cards maybe on the queen side, and maybe an endgame advantage later. So he parries this next threat, and I'm going to test you. How would you parry this threat? If I give you 10 seconds here, what would you do to defend yourself against the threat of knight f4? So this is a downside of your light square bishop is being robbed from you. So how would you defend this? If I give you 10 seconds here. Okay, Magnus just plays knight g1. It defends that, keeps the defence of f3 and h3. So if knight f4 takes queen g4, the king can slip to h1 without any perpetual check or anything. The knight's, you know, defending these two key squares. Fine. Rook b8. So white retains a little bit of trump card activity on the queen side, especially with this next move a5 fixes that pawn. Gives a4 for the knight, which means c5 and these double pawns in general might be a target. You can imagine if the queen ever gets on this diagonal, this pawn in particular is going to be harassed soon. Again, a bit of prophylaxis maybe from black. Knight d7, sensitive of his own weaknesses. So defending before the attack actually arrives, which is now, which has been a theme of this game so far. Black, you know, doing a move before the actual attack was made. Okay, so queen d6 again defending c5, but also maybe putting pressure on d3. Okay, now the knight actually goes to e2. So maybe now on the cards is f4. And against this, Michael actually just does a counter-attack against white's a-pawn, queen c7. This is defended now with queen c3. So again, renewing the threat maybe in effect of f4. Is that on the cards, f4? Or is it too committal for white at the moment? Well, the question is raised now. After rook fd8, well, with the rook on b1, f4 is out of the question at the moment. So white actually has to take on b8 first, giving black temporarily that rook on b8, which is seemingly active. But now he gets in his move f4. Okay, with that fully supported without any tactical disaster. So e takes f4. Black's losing a bit of grip on the centre after this. But in return he's getting pressure on white's pawn chain. So g takes f4, queen d6. But the problem is, you know, if we contrast this position now, after e takes f4, we've seen how this has sometimes backfired at high levels before, like Topolov when he's taken on f4. Because really, in this position, white's always got the problematic, you know, for black, you know, manoeuvres like this now. If e5 can be played, this pawn's now been liberated. It's been unblockaded in effect. So e5's on the cards now, with potentially a white knight getting to e4 at some point. So bear that positional plan now in mind. But first white tucks the king in a bit with king h1, gives way for some other possibilities like f5 and rook g1, ghosts of threats, which maybe disturb Michael Adams a little bit. He plays actually rook b4, immediately hitting that knight. So what's done about the knight? It's protected with queen c2. No exchange sack here with rook a4 though. That's not really possible. Rook a4, queen d3. Maybe just queen d1, but then e4 will drop. So actually, maybe we should check this out just briefly. I think actually knight g3 defends e4, defends the rook in that position. Knight g3 might be enough. But let's just check that. Okay, let's add a kibitzer here actually. So we're going to add a kibitzer just to check that rook takes a4, rather, pardon me, does not work here. Rivka actually likes black here, believe it or not, with queen c7, and then, you know, just attacking that a5 pawn. Maybe Magnus was in a bit of trouble here. If he has to lose a5, he has to actually generate some king attack compensation now using that rook g1. This is a Ribka line, and it seems as though it's liked for black, even though intuitively it might seem scary. Maybe this was worth a punt. If black gangs up on that c3, you know, maybe this attack's not so hot. So anyway, maybe this is so this position might have been okay. But queen c2. Let's look at this idea though. Just quickly rule it out. Queen takes a4. Rook takes d3. Yes, knight g3 is the move here. So that will protect f1 and protect e4. And this position actually is given as just a tiny advantage for white, 0.02 brief evaluation. In fact, queen takes c6, starting to get a bit messy tactically. Queen having to come back, maybe h3 here. This is all a bit wild now, but actually this position is almost like equal. So maybe that was kind of possible if black wanted to keep an equal position. Rook takes a4, very interesting idea. But actually Michael played knight h4, and this might actually have been a turning point. No, black still technically got an advantage, but we're going to turn off the kibitzer now. Okay, knight ac3, getting the knight off the rim. Queen g6. Okay, threatening a mate in one. Something has to be done about that. Knight g3. But now this you know, long-term threat of e5 and knight e5 is starting to emerge now. In fact, it emerges now after knight f6, e5. Okay, knight h5. But now the knight can be taken because now, you know, the queen's protecting that g2 point anyway. And now this knight goes to that e4 square. So white's achieved a positional aim. With that knight on e4, c5 is vulnerable. Also, the white queen has got access to f2 to hit that c5 pawn. So I think black has somehow messed up slightly with one or two moves here. Maybe the queen g6 was too much. It seems as though white is getting some big positional trump cards now after queen f2. His pieces are coordinating nicely. This knight centralized, hitting in a lot of directions, but particularly the c5 pawn, which was a technical issue, now is really becoming an exploitable issue. So knight f5. Okay. Now in this position, I think queen takes c5. There's a big tactical problem with queen takes c5. Probably rook b2, threatening a nasty kind of mate on h2 is unpleasant. I think because then if rook f2, there might be queen d1. Okay, let's check this out. Queen takes c5. This gives some concrete evidence here. How does this get blown away? Is it rook b2? No, that's not the strongest move here. Black actually has queen e2, just hitting f1 and d3. So if queen f2, queen takes d3, this is starting to look really nasty. c4's weak. Big advantage now, in fact, to black. Knight e3, it's all blown away. So white actually takes, in the best possible manner, best possible move, actually, it seems, knight takes c5. So an advantage for white, finally. Okay, so Michael Adams a pawn down now. Not only that, is a6 pawn's now a problem, and if a6 drops, then as we've seen in another Magnus win, you know, a pawn is going to be decisive. So queen h3, okay, trying to tie down that knight to d3. So the knight's actually kept on c5 for a bit more. Rook e1, as though maybe e6 is also on the cards. Now knight h4. Black's pieces are getting a bit decentralized, as though, you know, he's going for a king attack, but is there much support for it? In fact, this next move just offers just to get the queens off, to just still play on white's trump cards, which are on the queen side, and this dominant sort of Nimzo knight, you know, where there was double pawns, there's mighty knight outposts, and also a6 is a real problem. So this looks as though it's turned into a disaster now after these queens come off for black. So knight f3, rook f1. Okay, the knight's got a seemingly nice central square now, but the king is now free to run to try and get to that e4 square. So this kind of manoeuvre is on the cards. King g2. At the moment, rook b2, there's rook f2. So a6 is still a problem, but at the moment, knight a6, rook a4 as well, hitting a5. So there's no rush to move this knight from c5. It's a mighty knight there. If the king can just come to e4 first, drive this knight, then white's going to drive home his advantages more easily. But knight e6 changes the picture again. Okay, so this time, something has to be done. So knight takes a6, allowing rook a4. But now, this has been nicely calculated by Magnus, that this knight coming to e6 means f5 is more effective now with tempo. Knight g5, and now knight c7, and there's a big problem now with rook takes a5, namely e6. This knight is carrying these pawns forward. Two nasty pawns, nasty potential e-pawn. So king g8 to try and rescue that situation, but now the pawn can be driven to a6, protected by that knight, which is invaded on c7. After king f8, king f2, and this spells doom for black now, because really the king is just going to glide on these dark squares, hit c6, and this pawn's going to just be very decisive as well. Okay, but is that really the end of the story? Although we have 1-0 now, you know, what if, for example, the black king decided to try and attack that knight? So again, let's do a final check on this position. Okay, let's add a Kibitzer again just to check this position. Is it really end of game? Say king e7, king e3, in fact might not even be the strongest move here. In this position, if the king's marching over there, the king's sensitive on the second rank. Actually, rook b1 here might actually be a very strong move. Rybka checking this, of course. So check. Maybe the king doesn't want to go to the centre. Okay, king e3. Now here, either rook b7 or c5. So rook b7 is also looking natural and strong. Okay, sack the e5 pawn. This a pawn looks as though it's a real menace. And now here, a7 is strong. Even technically stronger is knight d5, interrupting that rook from getting to a5. So an a7 here, queening. Okay, so there's big problems in the final position. But this more intuitive plan of getting the king to the centre is not as effective, it seems, as just rook b1 here. Actually, let's have a look at this. This wouldn't be good for white. He'd be losing a6. So the precise move here to win this looks to be rook b1 to try and get support for that knight just in time. So if king d7, there's rook b7 here just in time support in this position, and now these pawns are free to be menacing here. e6. So if any rook a6 is here, there's always e7 at the end of that. If rook a6, knight a6, king b7, there's e7. So these two pawns are really tying down the black king. They're overloading the black king here in this final position. Just to make sure, rook a6, there's e7 here. So this combination of pawns, this rook coming to the 7th rank. So this is intriguing stuff, how white's got a critical, massive advantage here in this endgame, but it has to be played precisely. So even though the move king f2 was played here, we might ask why actually rook b1 straight away was not played. But maybe here, okay, check, that's the point. Because the check is actually driving the king on the first rank. So that's slightly less accurate, but still much better for white apparently, even in this position. White's still doing fine. He gets the rook on the 7th, it's still very dangerous for black. So this was just a slight improvement on that plan for Magnus, to just first play king f2. So I think the idea now, in retrospect, of this king f2 move is just against rook a2 to be able to play king e3. But he really just wants now to get the rook to the 7th rank and have both these guys that they're going to play the final decisive role in the game. So, bit of a long explanation at the end actually, why king f2 is so decisive. So why Mike Adams would have resigned here. Okay, let's have a look in the game in overview and summary. So, quiet English opening played from Magnus. And he doesn't mind his light square bishop being exchanged off. He knows what he's doing with the position. He's keeping his trump cards on the queen side, just about. Although it did seem at one stage as though a5 was a vulnerability. But, so knight g1, there's a few humble looking moves inserted in this game. But there comes to be a critical point where it seems Michael Adams got a bit scared. Maybe because of these rook g1 possibilities and these possibilities for attack, that here with the queen coming off this a5, because b4 also locked away that protection of a5. It's strange, maybe in this position instead of knight h4, the clear improvement might have been just queen c7, just go for that a5 and not worry about the kingside attack. So knight h4, it seems as though this unfortunately led to a situation, this queen g6 especially here, where the black queen was just getting exchanged off. Unless there's an improvement here in this position, if we have a look at this position, can this really be justified with the knight on h4 and the rook on b4? It seems to be a case of overstretching resources. Okay, let's say queen e6 though, and then say queen d6, just waiting around, knight e5, just grabbing some squares. This looks as though technically, from an engine point of view, it's okay for black. I'm not sure if it needs nasty looking moves like g5 though, just queen f6. Black seems to be holding the position here. So maybe in what transpired in the game, where black may have gone really wrong here was this queen g6 move. It's starting this course here of this queen exchange, which is not in black's favour. Okay, and once the knight e4, the evaluation really changes here, because black starts to be under real pressure, and now white's emerging with an advantage, especially getting the queens off. The advantage becomes very clear and pronounced now. That white's just won a pawn on the queen side. He's about to win a6, is on the verge. At the moment it's just rook a4 stopping that. But in this final phase here, it seems that black's really overstretched now against these pawns and this pawn. And this high precision move is fascinating, just against rook a2 to be able to play king e3. But the real point is rook b7 to b7 if the king's going to try and rescue the situation here. Okay. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? A fine positional game from Magnus. Thanks very much.